Welcome back to your ultimate pit stop, Piston Pundit. Tariffs are often pitched as a blunt instrument to shield domestic industry, but in a modern automotive ecosystem built on precision timing and cross-border flow, blunt tools tend to shatter fine tolerances. Nearly a year into Donald Trump's renewed tariff push, the impact is no longer theoretical. From assembly lines and dealership inventories to fuel pricing and travel patterns, the shockwaves are propagating through the entire vehicle economy. What started as leverage has evolved into a structural reset, one that's changing how allies build, buy, drive, and fuel cars. When tariffs became a stress test for global supply chains. The core theory behind the latest U.S. tariffs was straightforward: leverage market size, absorb short-term pain, and force alignment. On paper, that logic assumes the system behaves like a single gearbox. In reality, the automotive industry is a multi-shaft transmission. Steel cast in Canada feeds U.S. engine blocks, semiconductors from Asia run powertrain controllers, and final vehicles roll out to global markets. Introduce friction at one point, and the entire drivetrain feels it. By early 2025, tariffs widened across metals, manufactured goods, and key auto components. What caught policymakers off guard wasn't retaliation, it was rerouting. Partners began redesigning supply chains, dual sourcing components, and nudging consumers away from U.S. products. For automakers, predictability is torque. When inputs wobble, assembly cadence falters, logistics costs rise, and vehicle pricing loses its footing. Instead of snapping back, allies quietly disengaged, and that quiet disengagement showed up first, not in factories, but in consumer behavior across the border. Canada pushes back. Boycotts trigger automotive ripple effects. Canada's response marked a clear phase shift. This wasn't about a single tariff code, it was a behavioral pivot. Consumer frustration hardened into routine. Product scanner apps highlighting U.S. goods surged, retailers rebalanced shelves, and buying patterns changed. In automotive terms, that's not a warning light. It's a sustained drop in RPM. The spillover was immediate. Fewer cross-border trips meant fewer miles driven on U.S. roads, fewer fuel stops, fewer service visits, and fewer dealership walk-ins near border states. Canada is the largest source of foreign visitors to the U.S., many arriving by car. As return trips declined, border economies felt it across gas stations, parts suppliers, service bays, and transport operators. Once driver habits change, demand elasticity collapses, and thin-margin auto businesses feel it first. But consumer pullback was only the surface-level signal. Beneath it, manufacturers were facing a deeper replacement risk. Before we dive into that, do us a favor and smash that like and subscribe button. It really helps us reach more auto enthusiasts just like you. Now let's shift gears from buyers and borders to the factory floor itself. The Spirit Slump, a warning signal for auto manufacturing. The collapse of U.S. spirits exports to Canada might seem off-topic until you view it through a manufacturing lens. When provinces pulled American alcohol, demand didn't vanish, it was substituted. Domestic and non-U.S. suppliers filled the shelves almost instantly. That substitution effect is the nightmare scenario for automakers and Tier 1 suppliers alike. Losing shelf space or procurement contracts isn't a temporary dip, it's a displacement. Once OEMs lock in new suppliers, switching back adds cost, risk, and no upside. That's how production pauses emerge. Export demand softens, inventories stack up, storage costs climb, and lines slow without headlines. In auto manufacturing, shutdowns rarely arrive with drama, but the employment and investment consequences linger long after the machines go quiet. And manufacturing slowdowns don't stay contained. They bleed into how people move. Tourism declines, the hidden drag on vehicle demand. Tourism rarely shows up on an automaker's income statement, yet it quietly drives a huge share of vehicle demand. Rental fleets, airport shuttles, ride-hailing operators, and regional transport services all depend on steady cross-border travel. When Canadian visits to the U.S. fell sharply, by air and by car, the effect rippled through the mobility stack. Rental companies postponed fleet refresh cycles. Dealers supplying vans, SUVs, and light commercial vehicles saw orders soften. Maintenance intervals stretched, and fuel demand dipped in border-heavy regions. These aren't headline crashes, they're slow leaks. States most exposed, New York, Michigan, Washington, Maine, and Florida, felt it first. Fewer vehicle miles traveled means less fuel burned, fewer repairs booked, slower replacement cycles, and weaker downstream demand across the automotive ecosystem. And once miles driven fall, the pressure inevitably reaches the energy system. Energy decoupling, oil shifts, reshape fuel and vehicle costs. The most structurally important shift is happening in energy. Canada has long supplied the heavy crude many U.S. refineries are engineered around. Tariffs and political volatility, however, accelerated Ottawa's push to diversify. Westward pipeline routes and Asian export options gained momentum, reducing dependence on the U.S. market. For American refiners, this isn't theoretical. Plants tuned for Canadian heavy crude can't easily swap feedstocks without expensive retrofits. Tighter supply raises input costs, which flow straight into higher fuel prices, pricier logistics, and ultimately vehicle affordability. Energy prices shape buying behavior more than speeches ever do, nudging consumers towards smaller vehicles, hybrids, or delayed purchases, while fleets stretch replacement timelines. A trade dispute is now influencing which powertrains make economic sense to build. But while markets adjust, governments are locking in even longer-term changes. Allies rebuild at home, industrial power moves away. Governments didn't just respond at the checkout counter, they moved structurally. NATO members sharply increased defense and industrial spending with a new priority on domestic production. Funding that once flowed through U.S. suppliers is being redirected into local manufacturing, R&D, and procurement. For automakers, this matters deeply. Defense and industrial policy overlap with advanced manufacturing, metals, electronics, robotics, logistics, and skilled labor. As allies invest at home, competition for inputs intensifies, and supply chains that once ran through the U.S. are redesigned to stay regional. European and Asian manufacturers are strengthening local ecosystems, reducing exposure to U.S. policy swings. Tariffs meant to restore leverage are accelerating diversification, and the auto industry feels that shift earlier than most. Which brings us to the unavoidable conclusion of this entire chain reaction. Verdict: when pressure turns into distance. If tariffs were designed to reassert leverage, the outcome points elsewhere. Allies didn't capitulate, they adapted. Consumers formed new habits. Governments rebuilt supply chains. Energy producers rerouted flows. Industries from spirits to vehicles weren't shielded, they were substituted. For the automotive world, the takeaway is blunt. Cars are no longer national products. They're global systems of engines, electronics, energy, and logistics. Disturb one node, and the entire drivetrain responds. What we're seeing isn't collapse, it's separation. Quiet, deliberate, and hard to unwind. So here's the bigger question. Did tariffs strengthen American industry, or simply teach allies how to live without it? As fuel prices, vehicle mix, and supply chains shift, who actually gained resilience? And what does this mean for the future of ICE vehicles, hybrids, and EVs in North America? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If you want to stay ahead of these vehicle, energy, and policy shifts, subscribe to Piston Pundit and hit the bell so you don't miss our next updates and deep dives. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. You can now check out any of the videos on the screen. There's plenty more to explore.